Okay, good evening again. I'll shift of focus now. It is still Tuesday night, 10th of January 2023. We just did something about American politics. Just a few things over here in the Texas border and all of that stuff, and the recent things with the new Speaker of the House and new Congress and the total upheaval in Washington, which is good news. Now I want to shift directions towards China. Okay? Again, I'm going to try to do this in such a way so I don't get shut down or blocked. But this, of course, as you know, interests me a lot. These are the two big, power blocks that are in classic, Pluto extremism oppositions right now. I'll do a little bit closer up. If you've watched my channel before, you've heard me mention how the United States has a very big Leo Aquarius axis. That's a lot of that. That's basically the North Node axis, okay? Now, the Aquarius Leo axis is also just happens to be extremely important for China as well. So there's a tremendous congruity between China and the USA. And it's coming out in very stark evidence all across the world now. It's impossible not to discuss China, no matter how much censorship and, let's say, community guideline, issues we may encounter along the way. So I just want to go through stuff. Again, everything I'm going to convey here is all fully available to the public. I'm not talking about any kinds of conspiracies. I'm doing my own research because I need to know this stuff. I want to know it, so I'm just decided, well, if I'm going to do all this, I might as well share it. And I'm hoping that in sharing it, it brings a little bit of enlightenment to you folks as well. So this is what I was talking about earlier. Let's move on. I want to deal with this stuff here. I'm going to make another video as well. But for now, let's focus on China. And let's go over here. Okay, sorry, excuse me. All right, good evening again. Focus here a little bit more on China. Some of you have heard, you may not have heard. Again, I got actually shut down for this one on TikTok, but it's all over the highly legitimate, highly trustworthy sources that I access. The infection rates for the big famous bug have reached over 100 million, in fact double that and more, and there are also millions dead and dying, okay? And here's what is very, very scary. If you really dig in, again, please, dear algorithm, please do not block me for this because I'm just iterating truth and facts and information that people need to hear. So, I know I sound like a conspiracy theorist, but you've probably already figured it out already. This is all deliberate, okay? Internal documents inside the CCP have already revealed, and it's been proven, verified by the Epoch Times itself, that the agenda is to spontaneously open the gates for the Chinese public, get everybody as infected as humanly possible, spread that all over the world as much as possible, as fast as possible, and specifically inside China, whoever survives, great. Whoever doesn't make it and is going to die, well, just let them die off. Okay, that's their strategy. Okay, it's kind of scary, but that's how it works. If you've seen the material that I see, it would scare you too. Okay, I mean, they've got crematoriums, mortuaries, morgues, hospitals that are beyond remotely being able to cope with any of this. And of course it's spreading all over the country, but the main centers are of course the huge cities with 10, 20 million people in each city. There's a lot of them all over China. So the CCP plan is actually working. Anyway, some countries outside of China are behaving strangely, like New Zealand opened the gates and said, we don't have a problem. Come on over, China. Come on, hang out. Other countries are completely shutting the gates. Stay out, China. Nobody here, nobody allowed. And there's all sorts of middle ground stuff over in Europe, okay? They don't really know what to do in Europe because they're so deeply tied to China, just like the USA. They can't just like cut the string. They're too scared in Europe. Next thing I want to talk about with China is the big buddyship that's growing between China and Russia. It's understandable, and this is all a result of the Ukraine war. And it's again part of the Plutonic emphasis about extreme polarization. Yes, no, in, out, black, white, on, off, good, bad, evil, loving, and so on. And it's starting to show up. Like if you take the whole of planet Earth, let me go over here. I'm going to go back to the stage again. You know how I love to use my little map. So you can, if you wanted to, you could actually break the world down into two major chunks. There are the folks who actually like what is commonly called democracy, which is sort of like another word for freedom of speech, the right to vote. And of course, all that is in extreme jeopardy right now all across the world because, like in America, for example, we are the ultimate target for the folks who are trying to destroy our Constitution, especially our First and Second Amendments, freedom of speech and the right to protect ourselves and arm ourselves. So anyway, you could say that over here, Alaska, North America, Canada, North America over here, Western Europe over here, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, South Korea, and bits and pieces elsewhere are very interested in maintaining what they have, in fact, reclaiming their so-called democracies. We actually have apparently what's called a republic over here. But it's still about freedom. Now, if you go anywhere, I've traveled a lot, so if you go anywhere in here, in here, in here, in here, in here, up here, and over here, you would discover that you're dealing with basically dictatorships, totalitarianism, basically do as I say. There's no voting, there's no semblance of freedom of speech or anything like that. Everybody in those places I described basically lives in terror. They live at the whim and the mercies of their so-called leaders. Now, a lot of these leaders, especially over here in South America, like with Bolsonaro and Lula, for example, in Brazil, they had what they actually considered to be democratic elections. However, Bolsonaro has a history of being very corrupt, and Lula has a history of being even more corrupt. And so what is happening in Brazil, there's been a lot of violent protests and revolutions and breaches of their government buildings, okay? It's these kind of protests and riots are breaking out all over the world, wherever the masses, wherever we the people feel outraged and denied their sovereign rights to be themselves. And because the whole planet is now so powerfully connected with media, it's like folks over here or folks over here or in here, they see what's going on in America. They've seen the protests in Canada, because Canada is in real trouble. Australia is in real trouble. They've been heavily infected by these World Economic Forum crowds and the Davos crowd. So there's a lot of upheaval, but this thing that we call the United States is, I've said this many times on my channel, this is the ultimate enemy to the dictators, the Marxist regimes that want to take over the world, the totalitarianists, the WEF people, all of that. And so it's very, very turbulent, okay? And going back to the China-Russia buddy-buddy thing, it's no wonder that China is getting buddy-buddies with Russia, because they've got 1.4 billion people here, and they've got 140 million people over here. Russia has massive resources, including lots of water. China is desperate. It's absolutely desperate. No insult to China, but honestly, you're desperate. So let's just admit it. Let's just get it out there. No offense, okay? And so, because there is a famous battle going over here in Ukraine, all right there, and it is all over the world news. It's been going on as a slugfest for the last 11 months, and it's just getting darker and uglier and hotter and more brutal and more deadly. And the United States is pouring in billions. Russia is pouring in more troops. And the NATO countries are starting to dribble in some support, with weapons and a few, let's say, support troops and things like that. And this is essentially a proxy war, again, between a totalitarian regime and what we apparently call a free country. Now, the next thing is that China is watching this war very, very closely, because let's say Vladimir Putin wins, that's going to be a big green light to China to go like, wow, he did it. So now that's the green light for us to go to war against America, which will happen as a proxy war, in fact, where Taiwan will be the pivot point of the war. So that's kind of awkward, okay? Personally, I don't think it's going to happen. It's just going to drag out and become really ugly and brutal, and a way for money laundering for a bunch of military-industrial complex people. War is very, very good business for certain people, okay? Anyway, so with the China-Russia thing going on, they have a lot of weapons here that they can shift over to here to help Vladimir Putin to fight off America. So it's like a roundabout way of going to war with America without going to war with America. So there's that bit of a problem. Also, things are getting much more ugly and nasty now between China and Taiwan. China is becoming very belligerent towards Taiwan, and it's dragging the United States into it, plus all the other countries that supposedly support Taiwan. And Taiwan is, obviously highly vulnerable, but they're fierce and they intend to survive. And so there's a lot of places Japan is going to get sucked into it. And you've probably also heard how Japan is now militarizing after decades of constitutional limits on war. Japan just threw that out the window, and now they're gearing up for war. Japan is gearing up for war to support Taiwan. South Korea is going to be sucked into it as well, okay? And probably Australia, Canada, America, and all of that, and Western European NATO troops, they're all going to get sucked into this war over here. And it's also really tragic to observe, because though the worse things get internally for China, the more belligerent they get towards Taiwan and the rest of the world, and the deeper the bonds they form with Russia. Now remember, on top of this, financially, you've got the BRICS: Brazil, Russia, China, India, South Africa, and there's a lot more countries starting to join up with the BRICS, and that's part of the Pluto polarization, where the BRICS countries are trying to switch to real money and get away from the American dollar hegemony, the American petrodollar, which has dominated the world since 1971. Everybody's sick of it. I should do a video. Path Traveler shared an awesome thing from Rand Paul, about the US dollar. I should show that to you. Let me see if I can do that later. Okay? But anyway, things are getting nasty. And eventually, well, here, I'll just do another thing. So, You know, you've heard of war games, and it's what think tanks do in different countries in order to figure out the feasibility, the viability of war, winning it, what happens if we win, what happens if we lose, how do we win, how did we lose, and so on and so on. And I just saw something it was very comforting to me, but it was a bit scary for China. There have been some war games conducted here in the United States, you know, so we've obviously got our own interests at heart, where the idea is that they ran the war games 25 different scenarios, and in the end they came down to a conclusion that it would be a very, you know, I'm just going to wrap this up in a minute. Let me go back over here and I'll show you what I mean. The war games are very, very recent. It's just basically a bunch of generals and militarists sitting around a table with computers and, you know, quantum mechanics trying to figure out, you know, how are we going to do this? War is not inevitable. On the other hand, it's just sitting there simmering like a pressure cooker waiting to happen. Anyway, the conclusion of the war games after 25 versions and scenarios is that it's China will, okay, it'll get very ugly, very brutal, very quickly. A lot of loss of life, huge amounts of traditional hot warfare, ships, submarines, land to air, air to land, sea to air, sea to land, all of that kind of stuff. Gazillions of tons of munitions just blowing off steam. And because, I mean, let's face it, the United States is the #1 expert at war. We have war skills that no one else has anywhere else. Right now, in Ukraine, for example, we're being very, very restrained because we're not there on the battlefield except as a proxy. No matter what they tell you about how diminished it is here in the American military, it's still undefeatable. It's going to be ugly, and there will be tremendous loss of life, but it's undefeatable. And I agree with the war games. And what would happen is that you'd get a very ugly, very dirty, very deadly war, and it would be wrapped up in a matter of 3 months. That's the end of it. Because there would be so much, like I would say, pent-up energy released. Just imagine the Pluto energy as it piles up. And let's say a war manifests in the next year or two. We're getting closer and closer to Pluto 29.5 degrees. And at that moment, I know I want to be in my own bunker, okay? I want to be very well protected and very well prepped. Okay, you can watch prepper channels for all of that kind of stuff if you want. Anyway, it's there simmering on the horizon. Also in the background, of course, there's North Korea and China and the United States. They have huge amounts of nuclear weapons. I mean, there's a potential for like a nightmare scenario. And everybody who has the button to press a nuclear weapon, either just a local one or a monster, they know that if they press that button, they're going to trigger a doomsday scenario for themselves. Okay, not so much for the United States because we can handle pretty much anything. But let's say China presses that button, it's going to go bad, really big, really bad, very fast, really ugly. So anyway, hope I didn't hurt any feelings. I hope I didn't insult anybody. I hope I didn't trigger the algorithm. We'll see what happens. Let's see how long this video stays up. Please hang in. Okay. Good night again. Thank you for watching. Hey, by the way, I'm going to I'm hoping I can make it for Sunday night. That will be the 15th for some live. I can do a couple of live tarot readings and some live astrology. Okay? Thank you for watching, everybody. Have a good evening. Have a good day.